Good evening, everyone. Looks like the mic is working. I think this class is being live streamed now, so welcome to everyone on the live stream. We'll be talking about Lesson 5 in the Divided Kingdom class, which is the dynasty of Jehu. And before we get to that, the past couple lessons we've been talking about Elijah and Elisha, so the prophets, as opposed to focusing more on the kings. So I wanted to kind of get us refocused back on the kings that we're dealing with before we jump into the lesson. I should have pulled that up first. So we talked about Ahab in 1 Kings chapter 22. That was the end of the book of 1 Kings. He dies in battle against Syria's forces. If you'll remember, he tried to avoid God's judgment by saying, I'm going to have Jehoshaphat wear the royal robes and I'm going to go into battle disguising myself. But of course it doesn't work because one of the Syrian archers randomly shoots a shot, and by God's providence it hits Ahab right between the parts of his armor, and Ahab dies from that. So can't avoid God's judgment that easily. And then there was Ahaziah, who was Ahab's son, and we read about him in 2 Kings chapter 1. He died after seeking to consult Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, about whether he would recover from his illness. And remember in that chapter, Elijah is sent to go confront Ahaziah for this and say, is it because there's no God in Israel that you've gone to seek after the god of Ekron instead? I always kind of imagine that like a cross-examination question, is it your contention, witness, that there is no God in Israel? Or something like that. So that's how that went. And Elijah told Ahaziah, you will not recover, but you'll die. And he died. And then we had King Jehoram, who is another son of Ahab, and he becomes king after Ahaziah because we read Ahaziah didn't have a son, and so Jehoram kind of takes that role instead. I want to read 2 Kings chapter 1 and verse 17. 2 Kings 1:17. Would anyone like to read that?
Second Kings 1:17. So he died according to the word of the Lord that Elijah had spoken. Jehoram became king in his place in the second year of Jehoram the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, because Ahaziah had no son.
All right, thank you. And I also want to read 2 Kings chapter 3 and verse 1. Does anyone else want to read that verse for us? Jasmine.
In the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, Jehoram the son of Ahab became king over Israel and Samaria, and he reigned 12 years.
Okay, thank you. So the point that I want to draw out from these two verses is, if you compare the king of reference in the other kingdom that's mentioned, in 2 Kings 1:17 it talks about Jehoram becoming king in the second year of Jehoram the son of Jehoshaphat. But if you go to 2 Kings 3:1, it says in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. And so it seems like the explanation for that is there was a co-regency going on between those two kings, and that's why there's the different references, but it's the same, they're talking about the same king at the same time, so both of them are correct. And then we had Jehoash, who, this is skipping ahead a little bit, he was the king when Elisha died. There was the scene where Elisha said, pound the arrows against the ground, and each time you pound will be a victory over Syria. And he only pounds 3 times, and Elisha rebukes him for that. So we'll get to him later. We're not quite there yet. Anyone have any questions, comments about that review? Okay. So this lesson's going to be about Jehu, and I'm going to pull up my notes to describe what's going on in here. This image is from the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III in the British Museum. If you were here for Stephen's lesson, everything is in Britain, and this is in Britain too. And so there's some Assyrian cuneiform above. It's a little hard to see. Oop, didn't like that very much. Up here. And that cuneiform says, I received the tribute of Jehu, son of Omri, silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase with pointed bottom, golden tumblers, golden buckets, tin, a staff for a king, and spears. And remember, we talked about in past classes that the dynasty of Omri was very heavily associated with the people of the northern kingdom at this time, and so foreigners would see, oh, it's the king of the northern kingdom, that must mean he's of the people of Omri, even though Jehu is not actually of that lineage, but that's what he was seen as by foreigners. So this is the only portrayal that we have in ancient Near Eastern art of an Israelite or Judean monarch, and there's I guess Ada Cohen and Stephen Kangas wrote an article on that back in 2010. Mark found that. So if you have any questions about that, please visit with Mark.
Yeah, since we're live streaming now, and in case there's any copyright things, that's why I threw all that in there. Because I don't know this thing.
I actually have there's another picture we're going to talk about here in a minute, and I have to give credit where that's due as well, now that we're live streaming it. So Jehoram and Jehu. Let's go ahead and turn to 2 Kings chapter 8. And does someone want to read 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 28 and 29? 2 Kings 8, 28 and 29.
Okay. He went with Joram the son of Ahab to make war against Hazael king of Syria at Ramoth Gilead, and the Syrians wounded Joram. And King Joram returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that the Syrians had given him at Ramah when he fought against Hazael king of Syria. And Ahaziah the son of Jehoram king of Judah went down to see Joram the son of Ahab in Jezreel because he was sick.
All right, thank you. So we're kind of picking up the account here where Israel is fighting Syria at Ramoth Gilead, and as we read, King Joram or Jehoram is hurt, and he returns to be healed in Jezreel. And so on the next slide, we're going to look at kind of a family tree of the lines of Israel and Judah so that we can visualize how the family relationships worked here. Because right now, to summarize, we've got multiple Ahaziahs and multiple Jehorams floating around right now. We've got Ahaziah in the southern kingdom, who is the son of Jehoram in the southern kingdom, currently reigning as king of Judah. And we have Jehoram in the northern kingdom, who's the brother of Ahaziah in the northern kingdom, is the king of Israel. And so if you're like me, that's really confusing. And so we'll have pictures to talk about that. My phone has protested. So King Jehoram is wounded by the forces of Hazael, king of Syria. If you'll remember, Elisha earlier in 2 Kings chapter 8 had gone to appoint Hazael as king of Syria, and he was moved to tears over knowing what Hazael would do to the people of Israel. And Hazael had said at the time, "Who am I that I should do this gross thing," as Ephraim mentioned, to the people of Israel? And we can kind of see that happening here. He's already waging war against the Israelites and causing them harm. So King Jehoram returns to Jezreel to heal after being wounded. King Ahaziah of Judah, who's King Jehoram in Israel's nephew, visits Jehoram. The Israelite army remains to fight at Ramoth Gilead. That's going to become relevant here later in the account of Jehu. And Jehu, we learn, is a commander of the Syrian army. And let's read 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. Someone want to read 2 Kings 9, 1 through 3?
Then Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, "Tie up your garments and take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when you arrive, look there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, and go in and have him rise from among his fellows and lead him to an inner chamber. Then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head and say, 'Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel.' Then open the door and flee. Do not linger.
All right, thank you. And I just want to make a quick note about Jehu here now that we've kind of introduced him. 2 Kings chapter 9 and verse 2 introduces Jehu as the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. But if you turn to 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 16, where he's mentioned earlier, he's described as just the son of Nimshi. We've talked about in this class before how the word son does not always mean exactly one generation removed. And so this is just another example of this, where sometimes all of the details aren't given in every single reference about lineage, but we can put the pieces together and know how it all works. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this slide? All right. So here we have, this is, to introduce it, this is a picture I found on the internet, specifically Wikipedia. You know, when you get to college, if not before, they tell you Wikipedia is not a reliable source, don't cite it in your papers. But for our purposes, I think it'll illustrate what we want to talk about here. So, let me scroll down in my notes. Family relations that we're looking at, we are looking right around here. Right now, where the lines come together. And if you read, I'll go ahead and read these verses. So 2 Kings chapter 8 and verse 25 introduces Ahaziah, the king of Judah, son of Jehoram. 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 26 tells us that Athaliah is a granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. 2 Kings chapter 8 and verse 27 tells us that, just so I don't get tripped up here, southern Ahaziah is son-in-law to the house of Ahab. And 2 Kings 8 verse 18 tells us the daughter of Ahab was the wife of southern Judah king Jehoram. And so the daughter of Ahab is Athaliah. And when you put all of that together, if you're like me and you just read all that, that doesn't make sense in your head. That doesn't translate to me as this. So that's why we have this diagram. And you can see when you put all of it together, southern king Ahaziah, Athaliah, southern Jehoram, the house of Ahab over here, and we had Ahaziah and then Jehoram, and Jehu's going to come and take the northern kingdom per the appointment of God. Does this all make sense? Maybe help people understand a little bit the relationships going on here? And one more point that I want to make. Mom, Dad, you have a comment? Okay. I'm giving my parents a hard time. One more point I want to make on this slide is we see this intermarriage between the house of Ahab and the line of David. And this has really bad consequences for the kingdom of Judah moving down the road, having Ahab's influence at this point. And I wanted to read 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 27. I know we're kind of belaboring these verses, but there's a lot to draw from them here. This is talking about southern Ahaziah, king of Judah. He also walked in the way of the house of Ahab and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, as the house of Ahab had done, for he was son-in-law to the house of Ahab. And I think that last part, for he was the son-in-law to the house of Ahab, I think there's a causation relationship there, saying that part of the reason he was like this is because he was son-in-law to the house of Ahab, and the house of Ahab is as the house of Ahab does. And if you read, let me pull up the verse of 2 Kings 8 and verse 18, so scroll up just a little bit in that chapter. 2 Kings chapter 8 and verse 18. This is talking about Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for the daughter of Ahab was his wife. So there's another connection of that wickedness because of the house of Ahab. And one of the things I think is so interesting about this is God had commanded the people not to intermarry with the nations around them because it would introduce all this idolatry and immorality and wickedness into Israelite culture. And now we have Israel that's divided into Israel and Judah, it's still Israel. They're marrying into each other, but Judah is getting the same wickedness from Israel, the house of Ahab, that they could have gotten if they had gone and married into the nations around them, just like God had told them not to do. And so I think that's really a not very good reflection on where the kingdoms are headed at this point. Does this all kind of make sense? Anyone have any questions, comments before we move on? Ephraim.
Thank you for putting that chart up.
Yeah. I needed it. I needed it for myself.
Right, until you showed that, I had never seen any connectivity between those two lineages being discussed.
I think there's some valuable points to make.
But no, the chart really helps to understand this, because these names are, just trying to keep all this in your head. You got to have visual something to try and pull all this stuff together. It's like you got to have a roadmap in order to know where to go. Just like the overall Bible, we don't know how to get to heaven without the Bible.
Right.
But the Bible has so much in it. But having charts like this really helps.
Right.
That's my main point.
I'm glad, and I hope that helped other people too. I think I got to the point in preparing for this class where I realized there was an Ahaziah and a Jehoram at the same time in both kingdoms, and I said, I need a chart, because this isn't making sense. So, anyone else before we move on? Okay, let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So, Jehoram and Jehu continued. We're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 9. Let's go ahead and read the first part of the chapter. 2 Kings chapter 9, a little bit of a longer reading, verses 1 through 13. 2 Kings 9, 1 through 13. Does anyone want to volunteer for that?
Then Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, "Tie up your garments and take this flask of oil in your hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. And when you arrive, look there for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, and go in and have him rise from among his fellows and lead him in an inner chamber. Then take the flask of oil and pour it on his head and say, 'Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel.' Then open the door and flee, do not linger." So the young man, the servant of the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. And when he came, behold, the commanders of the army were in council. And he said, "I have a word for you, O commander." And Jehu said, "To which of us all?" And he said, "To you, O commander." So he rose and went into the house, and the young man poured the oil on his head, saying to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord over Israel. And you shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha the son of Ahijah. And the dog shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her." Then he opened the door and fled. While Jehu came out to the servants of his master, they said to him, "Is all well? Why did this mad fellow come to you?" And he said to them, "You know the fellow and his talk." And they said, "That is not true. Tell us now." And he said, "Thus and so he spoke to me, saying, 'Thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel.' Then in haste every man of them took his garment and put it under him on the bare steps, and they blew the trumpet and proclaimed, 'Jehu is king.'"
All right, thank you very much. So this account says, before that, God told Elijah that Jehu would be king 10 plus years ago, 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 15 through 17. That's what I'd referenced previously, the different introduction of Jehu and son of Nimshi. So Elisha sends one of the sons of the prophets to anoint Jehu. And one of the interesting things, credit to Mark for finding this, this unnamed young prophet is identified in some Jewish tradition as being Jonah, which I had never thought about that before. If you look at 2 Kings chapter 14 and verse 25, 2 Kings 14:25, that talks about a little bit later, he restored the border of Israel from Lebo Hamath as far as the sea of the Arabah, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet who was from Gath-hefer. So that's the reference for that. So Jehu is chosen to destroy the house of Ahab, to avenge God's prophets. And one of the things I really love about this account is after the conversation with the son of the prophet, Jehu comes out and the servants of his master say, what did he come to talk to you about? And Jehu kind of tries to brush it off at first. He's like, oh, well, he just came to shoot the breeze or whatever. And they're not buying that. So they say, no, tell us what he said. And Jehu tells them, thus and so he spoke to me, saying, thus says the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. And then verse 13, there's this immediate reaction of, in haste, every man of them took his garment and put it under him on the bare steps, and they blew the trumpet and proclaimed Jehu as king. So my first impression of that is it wasn't very hard for Jehu to get everyone to go along with him being appointed as the new king. And I guess some of the commentary I looked at indicates there must have been some pretty significant dislike for Jehoram at this point, and maybe some unrest because he apparently wasn't having military success against Syria. I mean, he got wounded in the battle and nothing was really happening before that. And that reminds me, this has already happened once before when Zimri took the throne through bloodshed. The army of Israel said, no, you're not going to be the king. And they appointed Omri, and he basically took over at that point. And so I was reflecting a little bit on that. And we read that God told the people, when they said, we want an earthly king, he's going to impose taxes, he's going to take your sons and daughters to run in front of the chariots and be bakers and cooks and warriors and maidservants and whatever, and all these consequences that were going to happen from being a king. But I think this is an additional consequence that we don't really read about as directly. It's just all this political upheaval about who's going to be the king. Oh, what if someone takes the throne and no one really likes him, so the army says we're going to have a coup and just install someone else. And so I just think it's interesting, God always tells us what we need to know, but he doesn't always tell us everything about everything all the time. And I think that's something that we would do well to learn from and understand. God just tells us what we need to know. Sometimes he doesn't tell us things, and that's okay. That's his prerogative. I guess that was the end of that slide. Did anyone have any questions or comments about this slide before we move on? Okay. So let's read 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 14 through 22. That's 2 Kings 9, verses 14 through 22. Would anyone like to volunteer to read that?
Thus Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram, with all Israel, had been on guard at Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Syria. But King Joram had returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. So Jehu said, if this is your decision, then let no one slip out of the city to go and tell the news in Jezreel. Then Jehu mounted his chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to visit Joram. Now the watchman was standing on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came, and said, I see a company. And Joram said, take a horseman and send to meet them, and let him say, is it peace? So a man on horseback went to meet him and said, "Thus says the king, is it peace?" And Jehu said, "What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me." And the watchman reported, saying, "The messenger reached them, but he is not coming back." Then he sent out a second horseman who came to them and said, "Thus the king has said, is it peace?" And Jehu answered, "What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me." Again the watchman reported, "He reached them, but he is not coming back. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously." How far was I going again?
22.
Okay. Joram said, "Make ready," and they made ready his chariot. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, set out, each in his chariot, and went to meet Jehu, and meet him at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. And when Joram saw Jehu, he said, "Is it peace, Jehu?" He answered, "What peace can there be, so long as the whorings and the sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many?"
All right. Thank you. So this is the account of Jehu quickly taking action after being appointed. He hurries to Jezreel to kill King Jehoram. He wants to avoid word spreading of, oh, someone's new on the block saying, "I'm the king," and that would mean the old king would have time to prepare his defenses and get ready, and Jehu wants to avoid all that mess. And so I love this note in verse 20. He drives his chariot furiously. I think Jehu is my dad's favorite king of Israel. He drives really fast. But there's also a deeper lesson that I want to draw from this. The watchman from a great distance can see it's Jehu because he drives furiously. And so that means Jehu had a reputation for driving furiously. People knew that he did that. They knew that was what he was like. And the point that I want to draw from that is people are watching us and they see what we do, even if we don't realize they see that. And we can get reputations for doing good things and being good people if we act like that. But if we're not careful, we can get reputations for not so good things too. And out of deference to my dad, I won't comment on whether driving fast is good or bad. But Jehu had a reputation for driving furiously. So. See, we have fun in this class. So 2 messengers are sent from Jezreel, and what we read is Jehu gave kind of this interesting response, which is, I'll pull up the verse. So it's in verse 18, and then again in verse 19. "Thus says the king, is at peace?" And Jehu responds, "What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me." And I think that's an interesting response, where very clearly Jehu does not mean peace, but it's almost sort of that's above your pay grade. Follow me, we're going to take care of this thing. So I just think that's an interesting response. And so then King Jehoram and King Ahaziah get tired of Jehu conscripting all their messengers, and they ride out themselves to meet Jehu in verse 21, and we read up to verse 22. And before we move on, I want to make the point that they meet in Naboth's vineyard. And we had talked about in 1 Kings chapter 21, verses 17 through 28, that was part of the account of God's judgment on Ahab's house after Ahab and Jezebel wiped out Naboth's family and took the vineyard. So what is said, 1 Kings 21:19, the judgment pronounced says in part that dogs would lick up Ahab's blood where they licked up Naboth's blood. But we read in 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 28, remember, after that judgment, Ahab has that brief, but we think sincere repentance for a time. And Ahab, because of Ahab's repentance, the Lord says he'll defer that judgment to happen in the days of Ahab's son. And so northern Jehoram is technically 2 kings removed from Ahab, but Ahaziah before him was a son of Ahab, and Jehoram is also a son of Ahab. So that part of the prophecy is about to come true. We're going to see that judgment where Naboth's blood was shed. Does anyone have any questions, comments before we move on? All right, let's move on. Oh. Is it peace, Jehu? And where John read up to, I think we can tell the answer is very much, it is not peace. And we will, 2 Kings chapter 9, continuing. Let's go ahead and read 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 23 through 28. 2 Kings 9, 23 through 28. Dad, you can read that?
Yes, Furious Dad would love to read this. Yeah, there you go. Okay. 23 through 28. Then Joram reigned about and fled, saying to Ahaziah, "Treachery, O Ahaziah!" And Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart, and he sank in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar, his aide, "Take him up and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember when you and I rode side by side behind Ahab his father, how the Lord made this pronouncement against him. As surely as I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, I will repay you on this plot of ground. Now therefore, take him up and throw him on the plot of ground in accordance with the word of the Lord." When Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled in the direction of Beth-Hagan. And Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him also." And they shot him in the chariot at the ascent of Gur, which is by Ibleam, and he fled to Megiddo, and he died there. His servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in the tomb with his fathers in the city of David.
All right. Thank you very much. And so that's kind of the brief, unceremonious end of these two kings at Jehu's hands. Both King Jehoram and King Ahaziah attempt to flee. First, Jehu shoots Jehoram in the heart, throws his body in Naboth's field. That's what we were talking about a minute ago, how God will bring judgment on Ahab's son, where Naboth's blood was shed. And so his body is just thrown in there in Naboth's field. And he has Ahaziah shot and killed. Ahaziah, I guess, flees a little distance, but he ultimately dies from his wounds. And Jehu takes Jezreel without a fight. Let's see. I'll go ahead and read 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 30 and 31. Oh, Ephraim, do you want to read it? I thought you were raising your hand.
Chapter 9, 30 through 37.
30 through 31 for now.
Oh, 30 through 31.
Yeah, we'll read the rest in a minute.
Okay. Now when Jehu had come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she put paint on her eyes and adorned her head and looked through a window. Then as Jehu entered at the gate, she said, "It is peace, Zimri, murderer of your master."
All right. Thank you very much. I really like the way that Mark worded this in the slide. Jezebel insults Jehu. You know, my first thought when I read this is, why is Jezebel insulting Jehu by calling him the name of a king who's less wicked than her husband? I think that's a little ironic. But I think reflecting on it a little bit deeper, you know, we talked about Zimri earlier when he took the throne by bloodshed, which Jehu just did here. The army said, no, we're going to appoint Omri. And we read that Zimri only reigned for 7 days. And then he burned the palace down over him and he died. And so I think what Jezebel is implying here to Jehu is, you're the usurper here. Even if you kill me, you're not long for this world. And so I think that's what the insult is that Jezebel's throwing at Jehu here. But of course, as she was about so many things, including her religious beliefs, Jezebel is ultimately wrong about Jehu as well, because we read in 2 Kings chapter 10 and verse 36 that Jehu reigns for 28 years, which is one of the longest reigns of any of the northern kings. So just another thing that Jezebel got wrong. And let's go ahead and someone want to volunteer to read 2 Kings chapter 9, verses 32 through 37. Brandon?
You said 32 to 37?
Yes.
And he looked up at the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" So two eunuchs looked out at him. Then he said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses. and he trampled her underfoot. And when he had gone in, he ate and drank. Then he said, "Go now, see to this accursed woman, and bury her, for she was a king's daughter." So they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. Therefore they came back and told him, and he said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, On the plot of ground of Jezreel dogs shall eat of the flesh of Jezebel."
All right.
And 37.
Oh, yeah, if you could read 37.
"And the corpse of Jezebel shall be as refuse on the surface of the fields in the plot of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, Here lies Jezebel."
All right. Thank you. One of the things I like about this passage is Jehu is aware immediately of the judgment against Ahab's son that was fulfilled in Naboth's vineyard. You know, he calls out to Bidkar his aide in verse 25, "Take him up and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite, for remember," you know, when reading, skipping ahead a little bit, rode side by side behind Ahab his father, "the Lord made the pronouncement, as surely as I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and his sons, I will repay you on this plot of ground." But when we skip down to Jezebel, in verse 34, Jehu has her killed, and he goes in and eats and drinks. I really love that. He just he wins the battle, and then he just goes in and takes the spoils from the royal fridge, basically, and then he attends to, let's see about burying Jezebel. But they went to go and bury her, and they find out there's basically none of her that's left to be buried, and the servants come back and tell Jehu that, and then it kind of clicks in his head, and he says, "Oh, this is the word of the Lord too, that he said by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, in the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel." And so I just think it's interesting how the first time he's totally aware of the prophecy, but the second time he's not quite thinking about it, and then he gets the reminder that, oh yeah, God said that too. And so I just think it's interesting. You know, obviously God didn't forget what the judgment that he had decreed, but Jehu, I guess, forgot about part of it momentarily. Any thoughts, questions before we move on from this slide? All right. Oh, I guess I should pull up my points. Her body was trampled, then eaten by dogs. So moving on to chapter 10 of 2 Kings. Someone want to volunteer to read chapter 10, verses 1 through 11? Chapter 10, 1 through 11? Okay.
2 Kings 10, 1 through 11. Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. So Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of the city, to the elders and to the guardians of the sons of Ahab, saying, "Now then, as soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and are there with you, chariots and horses, fortified cities also, and weapons, select the best and fittest of your master's sons, and set him on his father's throne, and fight for your master's house." But they were exceedingly afraid, and said, "Behold, the two kings could not stand before him, how then can we stand?" So he who was over the palace, and he who was over the city, together with the elders and guardians, sent to Jehu, saying, "We are your servants. We will do all that you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever is good in your eyes." Then he wrote them a second letter, saying, "If you're on my side and you're ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time." Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were bringing them up. As soon as the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and slaughtered them, 70 persons, and put their heads in baskets and sent them to him at Jezreel. When the messenger came and told him, "They have brought the heads of the king's sons," he said, "Lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning." And then in the morning, when he went out, he stood and said to all the people, "You are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him, but who struck down all these? Know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he said by his servant Elijah." So Jehu struck down all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, until all his great men and his close friends and his priests, until he left him none remaining.
All right. Thank you very much. I really love that language in verse 10. "Know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord." I think that's really powerful. So Jehu sends to Samaria to challenge any offspring of Ahab because, the work's not just done when you kill this king and the other king who's related by marriage. We've got to wipe out the whole house of Ahab, and he had 70 sons. I mean, that's kind of a lot. I can't imagine having 70 sons. I think that'd be a lot, Ephraim.
This is a curiosity question. Were all those sons from one woman?
I don't know if that's possible. Okay, that would make sense. We've talked about how son is not always actual one generation removed, so it's possible that Ahab had a whole bunch of sons, and then, when you get one more generation down, the numbers can grow a lot quicker. So that may have also been part of it. Yeah. The officials send him 70 heads of Ahab's sons in the baskets, and I really find this exchange fascinating. Jehu has that background as a commander of the army, and he's really playing the politics in this exchange. So in verses 2 and 3, he sends to, it says, let me read it so I get it right, to the rulers of the city, to the elders, and to the guardians of the sons of Ahab. That's in verse 1. And he basically is immediately forcing all of these distinguished people to pick a side immediately. Are they going to be on team Ahab or are they going to be on team Jehu? And that choice is made clear in verse 5 when these people respond to Jehu and refer to themselves as Jehu's servants, not, Jehoram's or Ahaziah's or Ahab's servants. They're Jehu's servants. And so now that Jehu has the response he wanted, he basically puts them to work for him to get the result he wants without really having to do anything. And you can kind of see that army commander delegation thing going on. And then Jehu strolls into town, and the way he frames what just happened to the people, I kind of think it's crowd-pleasing in a way, You were innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him, but who struck down all these? And then he says in verse 10 and 11, basically, it's God's judgment coming to pass that this happened. And so, he has the people do this for him, and he says, by the way, you're the good guys, you did the right thing. And so I think that he's definitely pandering to them a little bit. And then Jehu kills all Ahab's house in Jezreel. I think it says until he left them none remaining. And then let's go ahead and read, I think, 2 Kings chapter 10. Let's read verses 12 through 17. 2 Kings 10, 12 through 17. Jasmine, you want to read? I guess.
They got nominated.
You did.
I got nominated. Okay. Well, what are we reading?
12 and 17.
Okay. Then he set out and went to Samaria. On the way, when he was at Beth Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met the relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and he said, "Who are you?" And they answered, "We are the relatives of Ahaziah, and we came down to visit the royal princes and the sons of the queen mother." He said, "Take them alive." And they took them alive and slaughtered them at the pit of Beth Eked, 42 persons, and he spared none of them. And when he departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him. And he greeted him and said to him, "Is your heart true to my heart, as mine is to yours?" And Jehonadab answered, "It is." Jehu said, "If it is, give me your hand." So he gave him his hand, and Jehu took him up with him into the chariot. And he said, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord." So he had him ride in his chariot. And when he came to Samaria, he struck down all who remained to Ahab in Samaria, till he had wiped them out, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke to Elijah.
All right. Thank you very much. So I think the first bell is about to ring here in a minute, so we'll finish this slide and see if anyone has comments and call it good. Jehu tells this Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord." I really love this because not only, see my zeal for the Lord, that's something we should try to display as best we can, but we read about Jehonadab, son of Rechab, in Jeremiah chapter 35. You might remember, there's a scene where God tells Jeremiah, find the descendants of Jonadab, son of Rechab, and give them wine to drink. And so Jeremiah does that, and the descendants say, no, we can't do that because our father Jonadab said we're not allowed to do that. And so the point that God makes in that chapter, he kind of contrasts that faithfulness to these commands of a man, even, with Israelites as a whole's unfaithfulness to the commands of God. And so Jehu is picked, I think, based on the fact that Jonadab's descendants are the way they are. Jonadab must have been a pretty imposing, dedicated man. And so Jehu's kind of set a high bar for himself, picked a difficult person to say, you're going to see my zeal for the Lord and you're going to be impressed. And Jehu goes to Samaria to finish off Ahab's house. And I wonder if Jehu ever got tired of the bloodshed. He's an army commander, so maybe he's used to it, but I can't imagine having to kill this many people. I think that'd be a big burden. Mark said he couldn't pull the trigger. I don't think I could either, especially not on this many people.
I wonder if that's why he is either feared or respected by the army so quickly, that either he is just really good at it. I picture him kind of like Joab and David, where they're all these mighty men, and so that's what I think Jehu is like, a mighty man. He's never called the mighty man of valor like we've read about others, but he seems quite the imposing figure.
That's a good thought, and I think he earns that reputation too. Any final thoughts, questions, Ephraim, and then Brandon?
So going back, thinking about Elijah, how many people did he kill, and was it just by his hand?
Yeah, I think it was at least, 450, and there may have, because I think there were 450 prophets of Baal and 400 of Asherah, and so we read, I know there was the prophets of Baal, the Asherah prophets may have been there too, that could have been 850.
So that clearly shows that God was behind what was going on.
Yes.
Yes, I agree with that.
Empowering them.
Yes.
I guess to kind of build on that, I'm actually curious, I was going to ask, because in Hosea chapter 1, when it's talking about Deborah conceiving her son, she says, call his name Jezreel, for in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel in the house of Jehu.
And that's actually something interesting. We don't read anywhere in this account approval. Now, obviously, God had told Jehu, you're the new king, your job is to wipe out the house of Ahab, but it's not, I don't think it's praised past that. And we read about Jehu's descendants. He's promised that he'll have descendants to the fourth generation on the throne, but ultimately it doesn't go further than that because they don't live up to the moral standards that they should. It is an interesting point. I admittedly hadn't looked at that, but that's a good thought. Yeah. Any other comments, thoughts? All right, let's call it here for this evening. Thanks everyone for your participation. We'll see you on Sunday.